good this thing, and we have already crossed much more than 100. Already till poster presentation, we have already crossed because 100 people are logged in, and there are many logged in with one ID. So without wasting time, I think we'll go ahead with papers. Any other thing, Dr. Harish and Dr.
Yes, sir.
Venkatachala?
The time for the paper is 8 minutes for the presentation and 2 minutes for the discussion. We'll stick on to the time, sir.
Yeah, I already told them anyway. Just again to inform them, 8-minute presentation. If they will exceed the time, they will lose the marks in their this thing. So please present within 8 minutes and 2 minutes for question answer and this thing discussion. So without wasting time, I think Venkatachala and Harish, shall we go ahead? Or any other
thing? Please, sir. Yes, sir. Please proceed with the paper.
Judges for the paper, please note that first presenter and paper is changed. I think they might be knowing this thing. Otherwise,
yes, sir. I conveyed Dr. Tejasvi from Kempegowda Institute of Medical Science and Dr. Srinivas from Rajarajeshwari Medical College.
Yeah. So it is a comparative study of total extraperitoneal that is gone, and now we are having cross-sectional study on a incidence of complication following double J ureteric stenting and its impact on the quality of life of the patient by Dr. Vishak from Bangalore Baptist Hospital. Bangalore Baptist, please come.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Vishak. Share the screen.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Tejasvi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please. Yeah. And Dr. Srinivas is also there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Welcome, sir.
Shall I start, sir?
Yeah. Please.
Good evening to the Honorable President, the Secretary, and the consultants and colleagues. I am going to be presenting a paper of a study that I have done, that we have done in our hospital on the incidence of complications and quality of life among patients who undergo double J ureteric stenting in the tertiary care hospital. The study aims to determine the incidence of complications due to double J ureteric stenting and the impact the stenting has on the quality of life of the patient. We have done the study in Bangalore Baptist Hospital, which is a tertiary care hospital with a bed strength of 340 beds. Study population, all patients undergoing double J stenting were included in the study. Inclusion criteria include all patients over the age of 18 years that undergo double J stenting, and exclusion criteria are patients undergoing double J stenting for pyelonephritis, patients having UTI at the time of double J stenting, uncontrolled diabetes with FBS more than 160 and ppbs more than 250, and patients having indwelling ureteric stent at the time of admission. It is a cross-section study conducted between October 2019 to December 2020. The study tool that I used was a ureteric stent symptom questionnaire, which is a comprehensive scoring system that contains 38 items in 6 sections, namely pain, voiding symptoms, work performance, sexual matters, overall general health, and additional problems. This is the symptom questionnaire that I have used. The sample size was calculated to be 100. The results of my study, the age and gender distribution, most of my patients fell between 20 to 40 years of age with a mean of 41 years. The males were more commonly stented when compared to females with a ratio of 63 to 37%. The urinary symptoms, 81% had, most of my patients had urinary complaints immediate post-stenting. Urinary frequency was seen in 81% of the patients. Frequency of noxuria was seen in 53% of patients immediate post-stenting. And urinary urgency seen in 65%. And majority of the patients did not have any urge control incontinence. Incomplete bladder emptying was seen in 57% of the patients, immediate post-stenting. Burning micturition was seen in 73% of the patients, and there was no significant hematuria noted in our study. Quality of life with urinary symptoms, 43% of the patients had some difficulty, had some issues with regard to the quality of life post-urinary stenting, ureteric stenting, and all the patients were satisfied or pleased with the quality of life post-stenting. Pain assessment was done using the VAS score. All my patients had a pain score of 3 to 4, which reduced at the time of stent removal to 1 to 2. The site of pain was most commonly seen in the loin pain. 80% of patients immediate post-stenting had loin pain, which came down to 69% 1 week post-stenting and 57% at the time of stent removal. Pain in association with physical activity, 65% of patients had pain on moderate physical activity, and heavy physical activity was not assessed immediate post-stenting, as we had advised the patients not to undergo heavy, not to do any heavy physical activity. Pain in quality of life, majority of my patients, that is 80% of patients, did not have any disturbance of sleep due to pain. Majority of my patients, over 90% of the patients, did not have any pain interfering with the regular life of the patient. 70% of the patient had increased frequency of dysuria. General health assessment, 56% of the patients had difficulty performing light physical activities 1 week post-stenting, and 49% had some difficulty in performing light physical activities. We had not asked the patients to perform light or heavy physical activities 1 week post-stenting and heavy physical activity post-stenting at all. So difficulty performing heavy physical activity seen in only 48% of the patients 2 weeks post-stenting or at the time of stent removal. Work-life assessment, around 90% of the patients resumed work only 5 to 8 days after stent insertion, and 51% of the patients did not have any cut down in routine daily activities post-stenting. Only 27% of the patients were sexually active in my study, in which none of the patients had any significant post-stenting complaints, and the stenting did not have any impact on the sexual activity of the patient. Conclusion: in our study, the incidence of irritative bladder symptoms was the most common, which at 84%, followed by dysuria at 70%, immediate post-stenting. At the time of stent removal, the incidence of irritative bladder symptoms was almost negligible. Incidence of hematuria was low at 4 to 6%. There was no effect of the stent on the procedure or the procedure on the quality of life of the patient. 90% of patients had loss of work days amounting to 5 to 8 days, and stenting did not have any impact on the sexual life of the patient. Now, comparing my study with the other studies that are present, none of the studies had a comprehensive urinary complaint, had a comprehensive analysis. So we have taken multiple studies to compare my study. When in comparison to other studies, the irritative bladder symptoms was irritative bladder symptoms and dysuria was seen at a higher frequency when compared to the others, but there was a decrease in frequency of hematuria in my study. And in our study, the patients did not require any additional healthcare assistance or additional hospital visits, which was seen in the other study. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vishak.
Thank you,
Any
sir.
questions? Yes, Dr. Ashok Naik.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, tell Dr. Ashok.
Yeah. Now, in your study,
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
what is the indication of stenting in your patients?
My patients, majority were stone disease, sir.
Okay. Now, given a choice, or when you
Yes,
are
sir.
in doubt
From
whether
Krishna
to
Chaitanya.
stent the patient or not, would you stent or leave it?
ठीक है, चलो.
Not all
Considering my-
patients require stenting, right?
No, sir. Depending on the
Yeah.
size of the stone and
Please answer my question.
depending on the size of the stone and the looking at the inflammation during the cystoscopy procedure, we can decide whether we can stent the patient or not.
When you are in doubt, will you stent or will you not stent?
We'll stent, sir.
Any other question?
Sure. In your study, your irritable bladder symptom has 84%, whereas the other studies has only 22 and 42%.
Yes, sir.
Why do you say your irritative bladder symptoms are more?
This is only immediate post-stenting, sir. The other studies which I have taken did not assess it immediate post-stenting or at an interval of 1 week post-stenting or 2 weeks at the time of stent removal. So in my study, even the incidence of these irritative bladder symptoms were more only immediate post-stenting, and it came down at the time of stent, at 1 week post-stenting or at the time of stent removal.
Was it related to any antibiotic?
Sir?
Was it related to the antibiotics you used? What was the prophylaxis you followed?
We have used either cefixime or nitrofurantoin, sir.
Okay. Was the same antibiotics used in the other studies?
No, sir. I am not sure of what antibiotics there was no record of it. I could not get in.
Comparable. Okay.
Any question from judges? If there is no question, then we'll proceed for next case.
Hope judges are there, no? Making notes.
Judges are there, but
Okay,
any
Tejasvi-
question from any
Tej-
question?
Thank you for-
Tejasvi
Tejasvi is
Tejasvi
the
already
judge.
asked.
He was asked.
Tejasvi,
Please check the chat box.
the chat
What
box I have seen. There's
Yeah.
nothing.
Right, sir. Right.
Okay.
We'll proceed to next paper.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Vishak.
Thank you, sir.
Next paper is again from Baptist, comparison of GCS and CT brain findings in patient with traumatic brain injury. Dr. Adarsh.
Good evening, sir. Let's start.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening to Honorable President, Secretary, my senior consultant, and my colleagues. I am here to present my thesis of comparison of Glasgow Coma Scale and pattern of CT brain findings in patients with traumatic brain injury. Traumatic brain injury is a broad and inclusive terminology, which includes a wide range of pathology that results from external force to the cranium and underlying brain. Traumatic brain injury is due to external force like motor vehicle accident, assault, or fall from height. Traumatic brain will lead to significant impact on the emotional, psychological, physical, and financial aspect of the individuals. Glasgow Coma Scale was first formulated in 1974. Following this, it has undergone multiple modifications to the present scale. It is most commonly used and widely accepted scale for assessing the degree of impaired consciousness in traumatic brain injury patients. It provides a common language of communication between the multidisciplinary group of healthcare workers. Investigation of choice in traumatic brain injury patients is CT brain. These are the various CT brain findings in traumatic brain injury patients. Classification of traumatic brain injury according to the GCS, according to NICE guidelines, it's classified into 4 classes. Minor head injury, which with the patient presents with history of traumatic brain injury with the GCS of 15 but no loss of consciousness, whereas mild head injury with GCS of 14 or 15 with loss of consciousness. Moderate head injury patient presents with GCS of 9/13, and severe head injury patients will come with presents with GCS of 3 to 8. Objectives of our study is to study the GCS and the pattern of CT brain findings in day one in traumatic brain injury patients or within 24 hours of the onset of trauma, and to correlate the pattern of CT findings in traumatic brain injury patients with the normal GCS. Methodology: patients coming to emergency room with history of head injury are clinically assessed and CT brain was done. After obtaining an informed consent for the study from the family or the patient, details of the trauma, clinical assessment, and CT brain findings are documented in a study pro forma, and statistical analysis was done. Our study for inclusion criteria is any patients who are above 18 years of age and had history of trauma within 24 hours of presentation and who undergo CT brain. And exclusion criteria include patients who are under the influence of alcohol and who has previous neurological deficits and the previous history of CVA. Patients presenting with the hemorrhagic shock or who report with history of trauma after 24 hours of the trauma. Our sample size was 200. Time frame was in December 2018 to January 2020, and it was a cross-sectional type of study. Data analysis was done using SPSS software. In our study, majority of traumatic brain injury patients, that is around 49.4%, was seen in third decade of life. As the age progresses, there was progressive proportionate fall in the incidence of traumatic brain injury. Majority of the male population were affected with traumatic brain injury, which is around 17.9%, and severe traumatic brain injury was seen only in male population in our study. Leading cause of traumatic brain injury is motor vehicle accidents, followed by fall from height and assaults.
In our study population, more than 50% of the people fell into minor head injury group, followed by mild and severe head injury. In our study population, more than 48% people had fracture of skull bones, whereas in our study population, 39% of the people also had normal CT brain findings who are presented with history of trauma. The majority of the positive CT finding found was fracture of skull bones. And coming to the type of trauma and class of head injury, leading cause of motor vehicle accidents were the main cause of severe head injury in our study population. Comparison of CT scan findings in minor head injury patients. More than 50% of the patients who are presented with the history of head injury had normal CT brain findings, whereas significant amount of people also had some pathological findings like fracture of skull bone, contusion, SAH. And even in mild head injury patients, around 1/3 normal GCS with the fracture of skull bone and contusions. In moderate head injury patients, the fracture of skull bone was more, and progressively the normal CT brain findings have come down. And in severe head injury patients, the intracranial pathologies progressively increased. This graph depicts the different type of CT brain findings in different head injury. As we can see, as the severity of the trauma increases, the intracranial pathology has increased. Even the patients with minor head injury, more than 44% of the people had significant CT brain findings. On comparison with other similar Indian studies, most common modality of traumatic brain injury was motor vehicle accident, which was comparable to the other studies, and most common gender affected is male population. And most common type of head injury is mild head injury. And majority of the studies showed that the most common positive CT brain finding was found to be fracture of skull bones. Conclusion: among the participants with normal GCS of 15/15, more than 53.3% of participants had positive CT brain findings, and intracranial pathology progressively increases proportionately with severity of the head injury. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adarsh.
Thank you, sir.
Any question, anything? Chat box, there is nothing.
Sir,
Any question?
sir, this is Dr. Srinivas, sir.
Yeah, tell me.
Nice presentation. How will you assess GCS in a patient who is intubated? Is it possible?
Sir, at the time of presentation, we'll assess the GCS before the intubation.
Acha. Once you intubate, GCS cannot be accessible, isn't
We can
it?
assess the GCS. We can assess the GCS, sir.
How will you assess the verbal?
We had E score and M score with T prefix, sir. Suffix, sorry, sir.
Okay. I have got one more question for you.
Sir.
Among eye-opening, verbal, and motor, which will predict most accurately the future neurological outcome?
Motor outcome, sir.
Okay,
Motor.
good. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Question from
One
Ramakrishna.
question in chat box.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell Lakshman, you tell.
Yeah. Here Ramakrishna says you had some p-values in the bar chart. What does it mean? What is its significance?
So can I go back in slides and tell, sir? So significant. It shows that in mild, for example, in minor head injury patients, the p-value is significant, which indicates that more number of people with minor head injury also had positive CT scan findings compared to the normal population, which is statistically significant.
Krishna, can you come in and comment, please?
Yeah, usually this p-value tests of significance, they are used to compare two groups. Here you have got only one group.
Yeah.
What does it compare?
Sorry, sir.
He's asking question.
P-value tests of significance are done now.
Yes, sir.
It is done to compare two groups.
Yes, sir.
Suppose one patient with surgery, another patient without surgery. So whether any difference between these two groups, such conditions, you are going to calculate this p-value to compare the two groups. Here you have got only one group. It's an observational study. You are just presenting the data.
Yes, sir.
So what difference it shows? How do you
Sir,
interpret that?
So as I told you, in minor head injury, where we had significant amount of patients with the normal CT scan, also and some amount also had positive CT findings. This was depicted with the p-value, sir.
Question number. Okay.
Any other question? Otherwise, thank you, Dr. Adarsh.
Thank you, sir.
This is for people from Bangalore Baptist Hospital. See, you must have some squares on your screen, like the participants or chat box or whatever. All that is causing a black square or rectangle on the screen. So I request you to come out of the full screen. Come out of the full screen option, and then these boxes will go away, or you take away those boxes. Yeah, no, you did it now, and that is the way to. Otherwise, we are losing the view of the slides. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And I'm thankful to staff and PGs from Hubli and other places. Many people have joined. It means our surgical society is very popular in Karnataka. And of course, it is popular, but people are joining. Thank you very much. And
Chalani
now,
and private surgeons are popular, Chalani.
sir, we were and one thing is missing, sir.
Congratulations.
Many people
to
are still complaining. Where is that fellowship and dinner? Private surgeons always having good fellowship and dinner. It is already due. Don't worry. Next time we will be doing better than this. Okay. Thank you. Without wasting much time.
Please consider Donzo. You can send through Donzo.
Donzo, for how many people now? Is 150 attendant. It is a very difficult task, sir, in lockdown. We'll do, sir.
Laughing.
We'll do, sir. No problem. Don't worry. You are part of us, Murlidhar. Okay, sir. So next is Durga Prasad from BMJH, a comparative study between endovascular laser ablation and radio frequency ablation for the treatment of varicose veins of lower limb. Dr. Durga Prasad.
One more is there. Shall I start?
Yeah.
I think he's muted. Can he unmute himself, please? All right.
Okay.
Durga Prasad, please start.
Present a paper on comparative study between endovascular laser ablation and radio frequency ablation for treatment of varicose veins of lower limbs. Coming to introduction, varicose veins are, as early as mankind, varicose veins of lower limbs and the treatment are as old as mankind. Hippocrates discussed them 2,500 years back. Management of this condition has been transformed further over the past decade. With open surgical treatment is no longer the mainstay. The introduction of endodermal laser ablation using either radiofrequency ablation or endovenous laser ablation, however, gradually led to the desertion of surgery. However, NICE guidelines of United Kingdom already recommended endodermal ablation as the first option to consider, relegating surgery as an alternative. Despite endodermal methods being accessible, uncertainty remains as to the ideal treatment for varicose veins, which would offer the best outcomes. Aims and objectives. Aim of the study is to analyze and compare the outcomes after endovascular laser ablation with radiofrequency ablation. Objectives of the study: to compare the outcomes by using following parameters: recanalization rate, mean operative time, post-operative pain, post-operative hospital stay, number of days required to get back to the work, complications and associated with the procedure. Materials and methods. Study sites: Bhagwan Mahavir Jain Hospital, Bangalore. Study design: it is a non-randomized prospective comparative study. Study populations: all inpatients who got admitted for lower limb varicose vein surgery, either of the above mentioned procedures in Bhagwan Mahavir Jain Hospital. My study period is from 1st Jan 2019 to 31st July 2020. Inclusion criteria: all patients above 18 years of age undergoing endovascular laser ablation or radiofrequency ablation at our institution, and GSV without significant tortuosity. Exclusion criteria: pregnant women, patients on anticoagulation therapy, and patients with severe distal arterial occlusive disease or with obliteration of deep vein system who are allergic to anesthetics, arteriovenous malformation, and those who are not willing to give the consent. My method of statistical analysis: proportions were compared using chi-square test of significance and student t-test. After a history and clinical examination, patients were evaluated by color duplex ultrasonography. Endovenous laser ablation was done by Biolitech TM diode laser with 1470 nanometer. Radial fiber was used. After gaining access to GSV under ultrasound guidance, tip of the fiber was placed at 2 centimeter distal to SFJ junction, and tumescent anesthesia was given over the vein, and ablation was done from proximal to distal with wattage and pullback time of the fiber was adjusted to deliver around 80 to 100 joules of energy per centimeter of the vein. Similar to this radiofrequency ablation is done with Covidian closure fast endovenous radiofrequency ablation system. In this also same 6 French or 7 French sheath is passed under ultrasound guidance, and after gaining access to great saphenous vein, tip of the catheter is placed at 2 centimeters distal to the saphenofemoral junction, and after giving tumescent anesthesia, ablation was done by sequential heating of the vein at 120 degrees centigrade for a 20-second time interval. First segment was ablated twice. Coming to the results of the study, mean operative time is more in EVLA compared to RFA. Immediate postoperative complications are slightly higher in EVLA procedure compared to RFA, like bruising and hematoma formation and burns. Postoperative pain slightly higher in EVLA compared to RFA. Length of the hospital stay: most of the patients were discharged on the next day after surgery. Return to work: most of the patients returned to work on day 3 of the surgery. Short-term effectiveness, when compared to both, it is same, equal. Postoperatively, patients were followed with a duplex scan done at day 1 and 1 month, 3 months and 6 months intervals. No recanalization was detected in EVLA group, but at 6 months duplex scan, RFA, one patient has got partial recanalization, which is statistically insignificant. And postoperative complications at 1 month, 3 months and 6 months were slightly higher in EVLA compared to RFA. And comparison between our study and study done by Hosam et al. And Pugoni, that showed similar results when compared to postoperative pain and postoperative complications and recanalization rates by using duplex scan. Conclusion: it was found that both RFA and EVLT techniques are having similar in efficacy, and postoperative stay is same in both groups. Less postoperative complications were detected in RFA compared to EVLA. Postoperative pain is less in RFA than EVLT. Mean operative time is more in EVLT compared to RFA. Short-term effectiveness and return to work are almost same in the both groups. With the availability of such newer surgical techniques in the treatment of varicose veins, the practice of evidence-based medicine is very crucial, and one should closely follow up the long-term results of the newer procedures. Drawbacks of our study: short-term follow-up, smaller study population, and compared with few studies which are based on low wavelength laser energy. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Durga Prasad.
Thank you,
Any
sir.
questions?
Dr. Durga Prasad.
One question in this thing, flush ligation concept is gone. Question mark, Dr. Sivaram. Whether we are
Trendelenburg operation, always it was taught you should do a flush ligation. Otherwise it will recur. Here you are doing 2 centimeters away from the saphenofemoral junction. Isn't it? It will not recur.
No, sir. No, in our study, until 6 months scan, no recanalization was there. Sir. But in when compared to other studies, like 5-month follow-up, 5 years follow-up period, only around 5 to 6% recanalization rates were seen.
No, the surgical principle is not followed here. No, that's the thing. My objection. Trendelenburg's surgical principle is flush ligation. Otherwise, there are 3 veins around
3
that. Which
tributaries.
can, it can recur.
That's what I told him to see other literature. He said in these methods, the recurrence rate is much less than what we were doing Trendelenburg operation. Long-term results many people have done. In that it is there.
Grading
Any-
from grade 2 to grade 5 we have done.
Doctor,
Yes.
you said that there are some local skin complications like skin bruises and all.
Yes.
You didn't use tumescent anesthesia there?
We have used it, sir. I have mentioned, sir, in both procedures we have used tumescent anesthesia. Sir. Even
What
after
did
using my. Yes.
Doctor, how was the selection done in your case?
This pre-operatively we have not done anything, sir. This study was done to compare both the procedures, sir. So by procedural basis only we have taken into consideration.
How do you tell which patients went in for EVLA and which patients went in for RF?
No, sir, that's what, sir. We compared both the procedures and related complications only, sir. We didn't have any specific criteria for to do this selective criteria for to do RFA or EVLS.
Okay, okay.
So any grading of varicose veins done?
Yes, sir. From grade 2 to this grade 5, we have seen this. We have done in this in them.
Dr. Chala, questions.
Yeah. Tell Muralidhar.
Yeah. See, one is, as somebody was asking, the bruises are due to the energy levels of a laser what he has used. I think he has to mention what is the energy level that he has used. And
80 to 100 joules per joules of energy per centimeter of the vein, sir.
Slide.
Yeah, that could be the reason for the skin necrosis or whatever the skin bruise. It's not because of the tumescent anesthesia. Another question is, if the patient had a saphenous popliteal junctional incompetence,
Yes,
what for that? Have you combined it with the surgery or anything else?
we have done foam sclerotherapy, sir, in that. SP junction means we have not taken them into the study, sir. Only GSV incompetence we have taken. Short saphenous vein we have not taken.
Okay. What about
Studies.
the incompetence?
Sir?
Perforator incompetence.
Yeah.
Perforator incompetence also we have not taken, sir. But EVLA is better, sir, if perforator incompetence is.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Which one is more cost effective?
Cost effective EVLA, sir, compared to RFA. EVLA is cheaper, sir. Little.
Okay, if there is no question, thank you, Dr. Durga Prasad.
Thank you, sir.
We'll come for next paper from Spurs Specialty Hospital. Dr. Monish Rajkumar, follow-up on different methods of hemorrhoidectomy, their experience.
Sir, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm using my phone to give the audio, sir. So can I start now, sir?
Yeah, can you start? Yeah, you full screen. Good, start now.
Good evening, everyone. My topic today is comparative study of postoperative sequelae in patients undergoing various types of hemorrhoidectomy. Hemorrhoids, as we all know, they are cushions of submucosal tissue containing venules, arterioles, and smooth muscle fibers that are located in the anal canal. Hemorrhoids are thought to function as a part of continence mechanism and aid in complete closure of anal canal at rest. The risk factors of hemorrhoids include excessive straining, increased abdominal pressure, and hard stools, which cause increased venous engorgement of the hemorrhoidal plexus and cause prolapse of hemorrhoidal tissue. External and internal hemorrhoids are there. External hemorrhoids are located distal to the dentate line and are covered with anoderm and are richly innervated, whereas internal hemorrhoids are located proximal to the dentate line and are covered by insensate anorectal mucosa. Grades of hemorrhoids, there are 4 grades of hemorrhoids: first degree, second degree, third degree, and fourth degree. First degree hemorrhoids, they bulge into the anal canal and may prolapse beyond the dentate line on straining. Second degree hemorrhoids prolapse through the anus but reduces spontaneously. Third degree hemorrhoids prolapse through the anal canal but requires manual reduction. Fourth degree, complete prolapse but cannot be reduced and are at a risk of strangulation. So the aim of the study is to compare the postoperative sequelae in patients undergoing various hemorrhoidectomy procedures. And the objective is to compare the postoperative sequelae in various hemorrhoidectomy procedures like conventional, stapler, and laser hemorrhoidectomy procedures, and to compare the rate of recurrence in each group. This is a retrospective study, an observational comparative follow-up study done using an oral questionnaire method, using phone calls done to the patient, and the study period is from July 2019 to March 2021. Maximum duration of follow-up 20 months, and the least is 2 months. The surgeries are done by 2 surgeons with 25 years of experience. This is the stapler that we use for stapler hemorrhoidectomy and the laser which we use for laser hemorrhoidectomy. And the sample size, out of 55 patients in the study period, 8 patients had grade 4 hemorrhoids, so they all underwent open hemorrhoidectomy. 47 patients who had grade 2 and grade 3 hemorrhoids were chosen into the study, and out of that, 10 patients did not pick up the phone, and 37 patients were taken as the sample study. In that, 6 patients underwent open hemorrhoidectomy, 19 patients underwent stapler hemorrhoidectomy, and 12 patients underwent laser hemorrhoidectomy. This was the questionnaire that was used, and based on the answers which we got from the patients, we made a statistics, and the parameters used were duration of hospital stay after each procedure, which is minimal in case of open hemorrhoidectomy, and the post-operative visits were less in case of laser hemorrhoidectomy, and the duration of rest taken for resuming routine activities was also less in case of laser hemorrhoidectomy, and the post-operative pain score was significant. That means, it was very low in laser hemorrhoidectomy when compared to other procedures. These are the graphical representations. And post-op complaints after each procedure. One patient who underwent laser hemorrhoidectomy had bleeding PR and mass PR, whereas no other patient in open hemorrhoidectomy and stapler hemorrhoidectomy patients, they did not have any other complaints. The rate of recurrence in each group were compared, and one patient who underwent laser hemorrhoidectomy had recurrence, and the complaints of patients with laxatives and high fiber diet was compared with recurrence of hemorrhoids. Out of the 37 patients, 32 patients had good complaints with laxatives and diet. The 5 patients who did not have good complaints with laxatives and diet, out of those 5, 1 patient had recurrence of hemorrhoids. So on comparing the above statistics, the postoperative pain score and number of postoperative visits are lesser in laser hemorrhoidectomy than the other 2 procedures. And patients non-compliant with high fiber diet and laxatives had more chance of recurrence. And there is no statistical significance between the 3 procedures in terms of recurrence. This is a short pilot study, which will be helpful in doing a larger study later. The study will need a prospective analysis, optimization of patients in terms of age, grade of hemorrhoids and multicentric approach to get a better analysis. Each modality of hemorrhoidectomy has got its own significance, and every surgeon should be trained in performing all the procedures. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rajkumar. Any question, anything? What is the cause of pain in stapler? Dr. Ravi Shankar.
Sir, if we take the bursting sutures very close to the dentate line, the pain is supposed to be more.
No, that is my question. Basically, staple hemorrhoidectomy is mooted to be a non-painful or a painless procedure. So, and the sutures have to be taken 1 or 2 centimeters above the dentate line. So, in your study, actually, the highest pain score is in the stapler hemorrhoidectomy group, which is what is very surprising because you would expect open hemorrhoidectomy to have the highest pain. So can you explain why in your patients the pain was high in the stapler group?
Actually, we usually put up a pain score for all the surgical patients post-operatively. Sir, we took the case sheets and made a note of it.
No, I'm not questioning your method, but I'm questioning why your patients had high pain in the stapler. Because if anything, the stapler group should be 0 because there or maybe 1 or 2. Yours was 7.64 if I remember right.
Yes, sir.
Will you do laser hemorrhoidectomy for all grades, or you have any selection criteria?
No, sir. Grade 4 patients, all grade 4 patients underwent open hemorrhoidectomy. We did not take them into the study. Only patients who had grade 2 and grade 3 hemorrhoids were given all the 3 options, and patients were made to choose. So whatever they chose, we did it, sir.
There are 2 questions in chat box. One is Dr. Rahul. Is it safe to make such conclusion when your number of cases in each group are so low and there was no stratification?
Yes, sir. It is not. I mean, we need a larger sample size to come into a conclusion, sir. That is definitely there, sir. I mean,
one from Dr. Lakshman. Difficult to believe that stapler hemorrhoid. Same question which Ravi Shankar has asked. We should put the stapler bursting suture 4 centimeter proximal to dentate line. Did the study compare 1 degree of hemorrhoid, first degree of hemorrhoid with different procedures? Same degree.
Grade 2 and grade 3 were taken into consideration, sir.
With different procedures.
Yes, sir. Grade 2 and grade 3.
Ramakrishnan, group don't have same number of grade of hemorrhoids. Is it okay to compare? If they are not having same degree, can you compare still results or complications?
This was a retrospective one, sir. So we could match only grade 2 and grade 3 hemorrhoid group patients, sir.
Okay. Any other question, please?
Yours is a retrospective study. You didn't compare your study findings with the international standards. You are just given your findings. You didn't compare.
Yes, sir.
You should have compared with the review of literature you should have done, and you should have compared with other studies done like this. That's what sir is asking.
Sorry, sir. I'll do it, sir. I mean, in the next presentation.
Okay. Another judge want to ask anything? Okay, then. If there is no question, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rajkumar. We'll ask for judges. These 4 patients are 4 papers are for prize presentation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are aware, sir.
Because another two, one is FNB, that is Dr. Raghunath, and next is consultant. So
Sure.
5th and 6th are not in competitive.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So next is myotomy with fundoplication. Is it a one-stop solution for achalasia? Dr. Raghunath from FNB from Fortis Hospital under Dr. M. Ramesh and Dr. Ganesh.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Shall I start, sir?
Yeah, start, please.
Yeah. Good
Share
evening
your
to-
screen. Your screen. Yeah.
Is it seen, sir?
Yeah. It is seen. It is seen.
Good evening to the President and Secretary, Surgical Society of Bangalore, and all my respected seniors and colleagues. I am Dr. Raghunath, Fellow in Minimal Access Surgery from Motsu Hospital, Bangalore, presenting myotomy with fundoplication. Is it an one-stop solution for achalasia? Achalasia cardia was coined from the Greek word by Arthur Hetz in 1915, which means failure or lack of relaxation. The incidence is 0.3 to 1.63 per lakh population. It is the most common primary motility disorder affecting men and women equally. Though it can affect all age groups, it is common in 30 to 50 years. The mechanism is due to failure or ineffective relaxation of the esophagus and loss of peristalsis, which results in impaired emptying and gradual esophageal dilatation. The etiopathogenesis is unknown. There are decrease or loss of inhibitory non-adrenergic and non-cholinergic ganglion cells in the myenteric plexus, and also there is reduction in synthesis of smooth muscle relaxants like nitric oxide. It is a myenteric inflammation and destruction of the ganglion cells leading to neural fibrosis and then to thickening of the circular layers of distal esophagus. There is a symptomatic triad of progressive dysphagia to solids and liquid regurgitation and varying degrees of weight loss, and other symptoms like heartburns, chest pain, nutritional deficiencies do occur. Also, patients initially suspected of having GERD but do not respond to acid suppressive therapy should also be evaluated for achalasia. Achalasia evaluation includes barium esophagogram, which shows Bird's-Beak appearance in early stages and sigmoid esophagus in the late stages, and upper GI endoscopy is done to rule out malignancies which can cause pseudoachalasia by infiltration of the neural plexus, and manometry. High resolution manometry is the current gold standard. Other investigations like ambulatory pH is done in cases of associated GERD with achalasia, which might be seen in 40% of the cases. And Chicago classification is based on high resolution manometry. Not only helps in diagnosing, but also in the classification. Classifying achalasia subtypes helps in both the prognosis and the treatment choices. Type 2 achalasia has panesophageal pressurization, and type 3 achalasia has spastic contractions. And the earliest description for treatment of achalasia for dysphagia was by dilatation with the whale bone in 1674 by Wells. Till now, there is no available treatment that can restore the esophageal motility. The treatments are aimed at palliation of symptoms, relieve functional obstruction, or improve emptying. These include medications like sublingual nitroglycerin or calcium channel blockers, Botox injections, serial phospholymphatic dilatations, peroral endoscopic myotomy, and surgical myotomy. So Heller's myotomy. The original approach described by Ernest Heller was in 1914, which was through a thoracotomy, later by laparotomy, and then by laparoscopic. There were excellent results with 90 to 95% prognosis. This is a short video of Heller's myotomy with tope fundoplication. And the principles include disruption of the LV, lesser esophageal sphincter, 6 centimeters of the esophagus to 2 centimeters of the gastric wall of the muscle. And the mucosa is mobilized up to 50% of the circumference, and partial fundoplication is done. The next question is fundoplication required after myotomy? Yes, because there are many factors which are all for post-operative reflex. And this is tope fundoplication, which is happening. And now you can see the bad submucosa in the center with sutures on either side. So the factors include aperistalsis of the esophagus itself can cause reflex in addition to the myotomy, and hiatal dissection also contribute to the reflex. So the meta-analysis that reviewed 39 observational studies reporting more than 3,000 myotomy patients shows that even though the symptom improvement were same in both the groups with and without fundoplication. The post-operative GRD symptoms were much higher without fundoplication, which in 31% of patients, and with fundoplication it is only 8.8%. The same thing was proved with pH monitoring, which should in no fundoplication group the were high pH in 41%, and with fundoplication it is only in 14% of the patients. So the randomized control trial also reported that even the poor outcomes or recurrence after myotomy were the result of severe reflex disease and not of incomplete myotomy in 92% of the patients who came back with reference in a follow-up period of 15.5 years. And the types of fundoplication can be either an anterior 180-degree fundoplication or an posterior 270-degree fundoplication. So this is a video of anterior fundoplication which we did following an esophageal perforation. And perforation was primarily repaired, mucosal repair was done, and air leak test was done, and then intraoperatively endoscopy was done, followed which we did an anterior fundoplication, DOS fundoplication, covering the mucosal surface. So fundoplication is completed, and a multi-center randomized control trial on 6 months of follow-up showed DOR fundoplication was associated with higher reflex and dysphagia than Toupet fundoplication. So Toupet fundoplication is recommended as it shows less dysphagia and less GRD by acting as an effective anti-reflex procedures, and another theoretical advantages of keeping the myotomy open. And DOR is recommended in cases of suspected esophageal injury. Now comparing myotomy with botulinum toxin, a systemic review showed that laparoscopic myotomy when combined with an anti-reflex procedure provided better symptom relief of 90% than all the endoscopic procedure. So botulinum toxin injection should be used as a first-line therapy only for patients who are unfit for definitive therapies. And the newer intervention like POEM, endoscopic submucal dissection knife is used to dissect the plane and also cut the muscles. The advantage is that the length of the myotomy can be tailored with the potential to include the entire smooth muscle of the esophagus. So it is best suited for type 3 achalasia. Inoue et al. Has a larger series of 500 cases treated with POEM, has a success rate of 91%, which was measured by a CAT score of less than 2 or reduction of more than 4 points from the baseline. A 2017 systemic review showed of the 116 patients with type 3 achalasia, clinical success was POEM was 92%, and a 2019 meta-analysis confirmed the same with 93% for POEM and 71% for myotomy. So these are the recent randomized control trials and meta-analysis. RCT in 2019 shows that POEM is equivalent to myotomy with the same success on 2 years follow-up. And in 2018 meta-analysis, which is comparing like nearly 5,000 patients who post-myotomy and 2,000 patients post-POEM, showed the results were same in terms of efficacy for the myotomy. All these studies and meta-analysis shows the incidences of GRD is high in the POEM group in 2 years follow-up, which was quite significant. And the incidence of GRD was seen in both the pH monitoring and also by the OGD. And these are the SAGES guidelines on POEM in 2020. They said that subtypes 1 and 2 may be treated with either POEM or laparoscopic myotomy with fundoplication based on the surgeon and patient shared decision making, but also confirmed GRD and reflex esophagitis were seen more frequently in 2 years in the POEM group as compared to the Helles myotomy group. And also, because of the great skill acquired in performing this new endoscopic procedure, the learning curve can be quite long. And all the published meta-analysis are limited by the absence of long-term
Time is over, Dr. Raghunath.
Last is our statistics in our practice for the past 5 years, from 15 to 20, all patients presented were evaluated had Helles cardiomyectomy, of which 8 patients had Botox previously, pneumatic dilatation, and 1 patient had POEM. We did Toupet for 37 patients and 1 patient DOR who had perforation. The mean duration of surgery was 90 minutes and the mean stay was 1.5 days. And this was the post-operative data. The GRD symptoms after 6 weeks were seen only in 3 patients, and the transient dysphagia only in 4 patients. And GRD symptoms at 1 year to 5 year follow-up was nil. Redo surgery or POEM was nil, and none of our patients had recurrence. So our conclusion is like properly done Helles myotomy with fundoplication can be a one-stop solution for achalasia cardia, as it is minimally invasive and has a successful long-term disease.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Raghunath.
Yes.
One question was What was your mode of pH assessment? Was it catheter probe or Bravo capsule?
Catheter probe only, sir.
Ravi Shankar.
I think the presentation was good, but you need to follow a very simple principle of presentation, because the stress should be on the data that you are presenting. There is a lot of theory, and as an afterthought, you presented the data. Should have been the other way around. Should have concentrated, giving a lot of time for the data, because otherwise, we can just listen to any other lecture.
Okay.
Okay.
Dr. Sivaram has given one comment. Your experience should have been presented first.
Yes, sir.
Same as Ravi Shankar's.
Yeah,
We are all
Dr. also told same thing.
We are eager to know your experience and what happened to those cases.
Yes.
One more question from Hosni Khan. Did you encounter any epinephric diverticulum, since most of the time they are associated with motility disorder?
No, sir. In our patients, all these 38 patients, there were no
Epiphrenic.
There were no diverticulum.
Any other question, comments?
Yeah, I think POEM will replace laparoscopic surgery, because that is now becoming the most important modality of treatment. What's your opinion, doctor?
Ganesh?
But since there it is all only like 2 years follow-up, sir. Like all the meta-analysis published are only with 2 years follow-up, and even in 2 years follow-up, the GRD rates are high. And even though the patients who are asymptomatic, who has undergone like pH study or OGD, and there are esophagitis, and there are in pH study there are elevated pH, and so it is best for POEM is best for type 3 achalasia. And even in SAGES guidelines, they have told like patients who are willing to take long-term PPAs, they can go for POEMs.
Right. GERD is a problem there.
Yes, sir. And even for in SAGES guidelines only, they told even for type 3 achalasia, we can go for tailored Heller's myotomy with extending the myotomy more further. But we never had any patients.
Any comments from Ganesh? Ravi Shankar, unmute. Ravi Shankar, unmute. Ramesh.
Yeah. See, what I wanted to say is even very big cases. I mean, we had a 92-year-old lady with sigmoid esophagus. Even that we could perform proper Heller's cardiomyotomy, and patient did very well. So I would not rule out doing a cardiomyotomy for almost all different types of achalasia. At least in my experience, every patient has done well, and we have not had to refuse any patient. Having said that, I've always been having a lot of arguments with G.V. Rao from Asian Institute of Gastroenterology. We both were together in Dr. Vittal's unit long back, and he is always arguing out for POEM, saying it will be the best. But I have always been having reservations about the reflux. He feels that we do not come down, we do not destroy the OG angle of his and so many other things, and so it should still do well. But only time should tell us what will be the future. This particular topic, we give more importance to that because things are not very clear. So we wanted to give more prominence to the analysis of literature till today. Everybody is still confused about what to do. But as surgeons, I think we should stick to this. And I strongly feel fundoplication, two-phase fundoplication with Heller's cardiomyotomy will stay. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Markham. Ravi Shankar want to give one comment?
No, I think Raghunath, you should say the pH is not high, it is low. Because
Sorry.
That's the main.
Okay. Anything else? Then we'll proceed further. The last paper of the day from a consultant from Apollo Hospital, a senior consultant, Dr. Saurabh Misra. Is the ETP RS new gold standard for medium-sized primary and midline ventral hernias defect? An experience of 182 cases. Dr. Misra from Apollo Hospital. Yes, sir. You can share the screen.
Yes, sir. Good evening, President, sir, Secretary, and my dear friends. Extended view retrorectal placement of the mesh is the new surgery that we have been performing with great effect. I would like to present my experience of 182 cases spread over about 5 years. I'm a consultant with the Active Surge from US, but it has got no relevance to the present study. So looking at endoscopic treatment for ventral hernias, we have multiple options, and it has changed over many years. The IPOM being the star of the procedure. We have laparoscopic TAPP repairs also. A few surgeons do it. Now, recently, the posterior component separation, the ETEP and the ETAR are becoming more and more relevant when as we're getting more experience in this. And the robotic repairs are also there. So, yeah. So, what is the problem with the IPOM? The problem with the IPOM is the mesh. There is high incidence of intra-abdominal complications, the foreign bodies inside the abdomen. The meshes, the coated meshes that we talk about are absolutely, they have not undergone the phase 3 trials, which usually the medicines, the other medications would go on. And then they are presented to us to be directly put in the human being without extensive studies. So these are very expensive. These are very painful. It requires extensive, more study, more stay in the hospital compared to the other procedures. Now you look at the recurrence of laparoscopic ventral hernias. It goes from anywhere from about 2% to as high as 9.7% or even 20-25% have been noted. The overall complication rates have been very high. But the problem was that we have had just one procedure which was very easy to do, and it probably gave us a certain amount of satisfaction. It was fast to do, and most of the patients stayed. Most of the work was done.
Saurabh, sorry, can you go full screen? It will be better for audience.
Okay. It's okay. It's better, sir?
A little better, yeah.
So the USP was of the IPOM meshes were basically that it was coated and it was supposed to be having no adhesion. But having done so many of these surgeries over so many years, I believe every consultant here would have actually encountered during the next laparotomy or laparoscopy to see that how much, what was the promises given to us were never fulfilled. In few of these cases, the adhesions was up to 83%. So going on to why it happened was, you can see that the meshes were constantly having problems. You have about 5,000 cases at this point in US, which are undergoing at this point the class action suits against them. Between 2013 and 18, a lot of these meshes have been recalled, and now not even a single mesh can say that it has undergone a phase 3 trial before being given to us. Now, Reeves Stoppa, coming to Reeves Stoppa repair, it is an old repair actually. Reeves started doing this technique in the open method in 1987, and Stoppa, they together understood the technique and put the mesh into the retrorectus space, and later on found that the recurrence rates were as low as 1.25%, which was uncomparable to any kind of procedure done at that time. The complications were less than 5%. So if you look at the story behind the extended view or enhanced view, totally extraperitoneal repair, it started with Jorge Dias when he presented this paper in 2011, and that was the time when we realized that enhanced view could actually do a great amount of service to these already step procedure where you can put a large mesh because of the enhanced view. The same approach was later taken up by Belansky and Yuri Novotsky, and these are guys are from US, and they have done it laparoscopically. So the endoscopic technique, when you were able to do these procedures laparoscopically, endoscopically, it became very popular. So it's caught up everyone's imagination. So we presented our first case, direct telecast of this procedure in 2016. Dr. Satish was kind enough to give us a platform where we could perform the East TOPA technique for ventral hernia in 2016 in KIMS. So since then, we have constantly been doing it. The principle of this surgery is the defect closure, which is always there. The one thing which has to be stressed here is the reconstruction of the midline. Now, more and more hernia procedures are not about just closure of the defect. It's about reconstruction of midline and functionality of the abdomen. So if you have a diastasis of the abdomen and you try to put a mesh alone, it will not work. So we have another thing is that most of the meshes are uncoated. It's outside the peritoneal cavity, and there is hardly any fixation involved. So we have between the Reeves TOPA technique, we put the mesh underneath the rectus abdominis muscle. The two sides are the restriction are the two linea similaris on both sides. Now, if you go beyond that, you are doing a TAR procedure. So what I'm concentrating at this point is just the space between the two linea. So if you see it, this is a perfect way of this is the perfect case in which we could do this procedure, because we have a good mesh overlap on each side, and we are able to close the mesh. Now, suppose you have an eccentrically placed defect. One side or the other will have a compromise of the mesh overlap. So what will happen is you will have to do a TAR procedure on the other side to have a good overlap. So, and if it is very large, again, this is not a very suitable method for doing this. So we start with our we do with about four ports. We start with the subcostal, the left subcostal 10 mm port here, and then 5 mm and 5 mm ports, another 5 mm here. So this is how we do it, and we have got extremely good results on this. I will probably go on. It's got a small video if time allows. I'll present that also. But meanwhile, I'll just go ahead with our
Time is 8 minutes, Dr. Saurabh.
Yes. So if you allow, sir, we'll do it. Otherwise, I mean, so this total number of cases we have done is about 182 cases in between February 2016 and 2021. The male-female ratios were almost the same. We did it in patients who had 1 centimeter to 7 centimeters defect size. The primary as well as incisional hernias were done. We obviously had some restriction to the case selections. We tried not to do in patients who had the hernias more than 7 centimeters, obstructed hernias, and comorbidities. So the parameters that we could achieve after about 100 cases, we could achieve an average operating time of what, 120 minutes. The pain scores were really something that you have to see, because these patients do not require any analgesic after the first day. So average pain scores were 2 by 10. The average we could invariably, for all patients, send them home on the first postoperative day. The average cost was about half that of the IPOM, because there was no coated mesh, there was no tacker, there was no pain. So we had a few complications. But basically, in the first about 50 cases, we were doing.
Saurabh, can we go little fast?
Yes. So we had one conversion into open surgery. We had 9 conversions to ETAR. Then we had an enterotomy in 2 cases. The paresthesia of the abdominal wall, the 3 probably because of the injury to the lateral nerves. Then there were recurrences in 5 cases. 4 cases were in the first 50 cases, and they were all incisional hernias and above 5 centimeters. Then we had a posterior rectus dehiscence, which was in 1 case, severe pain abdomen, which we really could not find why it was in 2 cases, and overall the complication rates were about 7.14%.
Can you
Yes,
conclude
so
your
it
conclusion?
is-
Conclusion.
There is a steep learning curve. There is because you can't see the intra-abdominal organs, new procedures with unseen. So I feel that the TEP procedures would be a gold standard in times to come, especially in the midline, medium-sized hernias, which are basically primary between 2 and 6 centimeters. And it is going to be more durable than the others because you have a mesh incorporation on both sides. And we have seen this in terms of our recurrence. Thank
Okay,
you.
there are many questions. One is Sivram comments.
Yes.
Adhesions to omentum is well known for IPOM with the mesh, but no
Yes.
intestinal adhesions. The data quoted about meshes is selective. There are large meta-analysis and long-term studies of hundreds of patients published in peer-reviewed journal with even unquoted meshes which have shown them to be safe. Dr. Lakshman wanted to. Then Dr. Sivaram commented 182 cases is a huge number. What is the EHS classification?
Well, I have not specifically put the EHS classification, but most of them were midline hernia, which are paraumbilical or umbilical hernias, suprapubic. So it is probably M2, M3 cases, sir.
How was the recurrence managed?
Sir, 1 minute. Saurabh, congratulations. Can you run the video when we are discussing so that everybody can see?
Just a minute.
You can start the video, then we can discuss also.
Yes.
Very good number, Saurabh. Very huge number.
How was the recurrence managed?
Sir, usually so recurrences actually we always did an IPOM, and even the posterior descents could be managed with an IPOM.
How was the closure of anterior layer achieved in defect of 7 centimeter?
In these, we have to be very selective in our cases. So what we look at when we choose a defect which is very big, we see what is the compliance of the abdomen. If in a lady who is multiparous, a 7 centimeter defect was we were easily able to close a defect like that. But if suppose in a young man with the 7 centimeters defect absolutely it was not possible to do it. So we have a way we do it. Usually these midline are also we also take into consideration what is the diastasis there. If it is 2.5 centimeters, we have to close it.
How you have any seromas in your complication?
Well, I have heard of these seromas in the international series, but a lot of people have started putting in drains. But frankly, I may be just lucky. I have never ever put a drain in my surgery.
Okay. How were the patient of PRS dehiscence diagnosed and managed?
Well, they would present in very quickly in the postoperative period. They would present as intestinal obstruction or severe abdominal pain. And you do a CT scan, you will see that the hernia site is very much preserved, but you have a bowel which is going between the mesh and between the mesh and the PRS, and you know that what you're dealing with.
Okay, thank you.
These present very early in the postoperative period, sir. Usually it happens because you are closing the posterior rectus sheath very tightly, and what is it? It causes what is known as the bowstring effect, where the anterior abdominal wall is very non-compliant, and the lower your posterior rectus sheath is very tightly closed. So that's where you will have that issue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saurabh Mishra, Dr. Sivra, sorry, Ravi Shankar, you want to say something?
Yeah, see the 2019-2020 consensus conference still recommends IPOM plus is the only procedure with the recommendation of 2A. All the others are in the range of 3 and 4. So for you to claim this to be the procedure of choice is probably, maybe your figures are good, but still I think you can't claim this to be the gold standard, because I think and again intraperitoneal meshes with Prolene mesh is good enough. You don't have to use any of the special meshes, and recurrence rates and complication rates are comparable as far as Prolene mesh and special mesh is concerned. So your comparison in terms of cost is also superfluous, but it is a very good series, no doubt.
Yeah, Dr. Ravi Shankar, I would not agree with you at this point, absolutely, because a lot of litigations have happened because of this, and I would warn you on that, because there is absolutely nothing which can save you if suppose you have put in a normal size, normal Prolene mesh inside the abdomen, and patient has you have a fecal fistula.
One more question.
Very pragmatic about it.
What was the duration of follow-up?
Follow-up, the minimum follow-up was about 4 months, because it was very poor in the last about 1.5 years, that because of the COVID situation, we could not really follow too many patients. But the largest was about 5 years and the lowest was about 4 months.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Saurabh, for
Dr.
nice
Kalani,
presentation. Little time extended. Yes, sir. Lakshman sir, I stop.
No, I wasn't speaking about it, but I have to very respectfully disagree with Saurabh. I think the medical legal bogey has been put forward far too much. There is solid data that the fistulation rate, the intestinal obstruction rate is the same for any kind of repair that you do, IPOM, IPOM plus, and we don't have long-term data for ETEP anyway. And that rate, fistulation and obstruction, is a very small complication. It's a very small number. And so for the surgeons at large, for the postgraduates, for the audience here, I have to assure you that please don't be scared about medical legal issues. We have to get beyond that, and I can give you any amount of data of thousands of patients where an IPOM is very safe. And so to call the ETEP today a gold standard and say that IPOM should not be done, honestly, at this stage would be incorrect.
No, I would I think I put it wrongly there. I do not say that the IPOM should not be done. What I'm saying is that if we compare the two procedures, you will find a huge amount of difference in the post-operative period and the recovery. No. So what we are looking at is that we are looking at the functionality of the abdomen. We are looking at decreasing the complication rate which you have when you put a rough surface against the intestines, which is a non. See why the coated meshes came in the first place. They came in the first place because there was huge amount of litigation because of the meshes. Now, because of the meshes, then
same bogey that came up. I would kindly refer you to several papers that have been published in peer-reviewed journals, where the same argument has been put forward in the discussion, and we have ourselves with personal data have shown that IPOM with Prolene is safe. So I'm not against ETEP. I appreciate your good work. I appreciate your numbers, but for the larger audience, for the large, people at large, they should not go away with the impression that IPOM is dangerous. It is not. Please, as of now, I think we have to be very clear about this. People who want to do ETEP are most welcome to do it. I appreciate them. But IPOM is not dangerous. Please see the data, and all data that is quoted must be really, really balanced. It's very, very important.
Of course, there are few cases which were highlighted that these complications are happening too much. That's the only thing.
Yeah, but sir, but the 2019-2020 consensus conference document, which runs into 450 pages, has very clearly stated still the procedure of choice for midline ventral and incisional hernias is level 2A evidence is IPOM.
IPOM, yeah.
Please do not-
I agree with you, Dr.
Yeah,
Ravi Shankar.
but
This
that
is,
the problem. Your series is excellent, but for you to condemn the other procedure to promote your procedure is not correct.
No,
Yeah, I'm
condemn.
not, I'm not
This is
condemning it.
this is science.
I'm
We
telling you,
cannot condemn other one and promote ours. It is a
And
science.
I
It is
think
not.
litigation
no,
bodies
it
also
is not
made too
mine.
much of. See,
It
the thing
is
is,
absolutely not
litigation-
my procedure. What I'm saying is that if you compare the two procedures, definitely
I
you'll
think
find.
you should stop the argument.
Yeah, that's what.
At this
Better
time.
we'll
Too much.
discuss later on, and we'll.
I'm happy that it has started some little bit of
some good argument and discussion.
Very good, very
Yeah.
good, very good presentation. Excellent quality of work.
We should
Thank you,
publish
sir. Thank you
this.
so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh.
Saurabh, we
Yes,
should
it's
Nice
publish.
presentation. And
It's
now,
already in print, sir.
yeah. Can you share this share screen? Remove it, please.
Yes, yes.
I am thankful to all the speakers, presenters of poster and papers for their excellent work, because many institutions in the presence of this COVID, they refuse that we are not able to do because our boys are doing the COVID duty. But we managed to do all these things, and it generated good discussion. I am happy, and this today's attendance was we have crossed century, and I'm very happy that we have done this one. I'm thankful to Dr. Ramesh and Dr. Misra for joining this private surgeons meeting with the good papers. And
thanks, sir.
Of course, BBH, Bangalore Baptist Hospitals, Philomena, Spurs Super Specialty Hospital, and of course our BMGH boys and girls. And I'm thankful to the Dr. Venkatachala and Dr. Harish and the Surgical Society of Bangalore giving us this opportunity to host this meeting. But one backlog, or whatever you can say, one drawback is fellowship and dinner, which is due, and we will do sometime. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for all audience, which we have crossed century. And I'm thankful to the faculties from other cities which have joined this meeting. I'm very happy to see all senior people from other institutions have joined. That's I'm very, very thankful to them.
Congrats, Dr. Chalani. Excellent meeting and very huge attendance. All your
Thank you.
efforts.
All because of
Very
your
well hosted, sir.
You were the first person who started this meeting, and PG attendance was very, very good. At that time only, usually we are having 20-30 PG. Here already crossed 80 plus during our PG teaching only.
Congratulations,
Thank you very much,
sir.
Dr. Sivaram.
Congratulations, Chalani, sir.
Thank you very much, madam. Thank you.
Very nice, sir. Very nice today. Dr. Shivram's discussion also was very good.
Good, yeah. In
Basics,
presence of
sir.
this
That is what
COVID,
PGs
yeah.
need.
Yeah.
That is what they need. Very nice. Very nice.
Well hosted, sir. Chalani, sir.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Shivaram, sir.
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Lakshman,
Thank you.
sir.
Congratulations, Dr. Venkatachala, Dr. Harish. and
Tachala,
me.
Harish efforts.
Awards.
We were having continuous conversation and dialogue all the time. So thank you very much. Now is there time for Dr. Harish to announce something?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So before announcing the best papers and posters, I have some announcements. The next monthly clinical meeting on the 16th June, so hosted by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Medical College and Vaidehi Institute of Medical College. And the EC has decided to do a Surgeons Day celebration, that is June 2021, on a virtual platform because of the COVID pandemic. So I thank judges for the giving the very good judge. The best poster is the case report of ameloblastoma by Dr. Adarsh from Bangalore Baptist Hospital. So congratulations, Dr. Adarsh. The best papers, the comparative study between endovascular laser ablation and radiofrequency ablation for treatment of varicose veins of lower limbs by Dr. Durga Prasad from Mahavir Jain Hospital. The another best paper is cross-sectional study on the incidence of complications following double J ureteric stenting and its impact on the quality of the patient. By Dr. Vishak from Bangalore
Baptist
Hospital. Congratulations for both of us. So at the outset, I have to congratulate Dr. Chalani sir. So for constant coordinating with me since last 15 days, and it's good coordinating a good scientific program. So and it is a very successful program. As you told, it is attendance more than 100. So thank you, Dr. Chalani sir, for your wonderful coordination. And I congratulate all the participants for their wonderful presentation. And I congratulate all my senior surgeons, the judges, and all the participants of Surgical Society Bangalore for this wonderful evening academic program. So I thank one and all. So we'll meet in the next clinical program. So this is the time for a national anthem. So thank you.